Velkommen til Digitaliseringspådden. Programlederen Jens Christian Bang.
Med meg har jeg Angela Wong, CTO fra Defendable. Welcome.
Thank you.
We will take it in English, but you can actually speak Norwegian.
Jeg kan jo litt norsk, yes. I can speak Norwegian, but as I was saying earlier, I feel like so much of my personality and identity is still wrapped up in being Australian, and so I feel still much more comfortable speaking in Australian English.
Cool. How long have you been in Norway?
I've been in Norway 8 years now, yeah, so it's beginning to be a while.
But it's quite far.
It is really far from Australia, absolutely.
Your family is in Australia.
My family's still in Australia.
And they are so happy that you
they're not
found the
most
place in
pleased.
the...
Yeah, they're not so pleased that I basically moved probably about as far as you can physically get from Australia. I think the only way it could be worse is if they were from New Zealand.
Yeah.
I was in Norway, basically. But yeah, of course, I moved here because the classic story, my Samboer partner, he's Norwegian, and we met as young exchange students many years ago and have been together ever since. So yeah, classic story of, love brings people from far apart to closer together. Yeah.
My daughter was studying in Australia, and the worst nightmare would be that she found an Australian.
Yeah.
But she didn't. So
luckily you still got her with you. Yeah.
Couple of years longer. And are you living in Oslo?
I am in the vicinity of Oslo, not here, in Viken, Lillestrøm-ish area.
Lillestrøm,
yeah.
Cool. It's not that very far from Oslo.
No, exactly. Quite convenient.
You had speak about insights from real attacks and why AI isn't your biggest concern. And you are from Defendable.
Yes, correct.
Just a few words about Defendable.
Yeah, so Defendable is a managed security services provider. We provide companies with the full gambit of advisory services, so things like governance, risk and compliance. We have people that are very skilled in GDPR, security architecture, but also probably the core part of the business is 24/7 security monitoring and incident response.
Norwegian company?
Yes, Norwegian company. It's headquartered down at Vika, and then with also local offices in Fredrikstad, Gjøvik, and also Grimstad. Yeah, so we're about 100-ish employees, and also growing. Yeah.
And it's security.
Yes, very security focused. Yeah.
I like the headline of your speech because a lot of people are just talking about in general forms about security, but you're having 3 cases.
Yeah. It was a bit. It was probably a bit ambitious to fit 3 cases in so short a time. But yeah, I talked about 3 particular cases that we worked on, and I tried to really draw upon the cases that were a bit different in character, so different threat actor motivations. Some were just out in nation states trying to do espionage, some were a case of financial gain, so they're trying to ransom something and then get payments. And as well, the cases were of different size. So we're talking, some 17 billion NOK revenue companies, and then some that are more on sort of the 100 million NOK revenue side of the house. So try to compare different variables and look at some common themes.
But can we dive into one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the cases I talked about came from a little bit my previous days working as the Telenor incident response lead. So that was the job I had before moving to Defendable. But yeah, telecommunications type sector, one where we're talking, nation state type threat actors that are looking for who is talking to who at what time. What are they talking about? And those sorts of attacks are really, really interesting because when you're talking about nation states, they're very, very well resourced. They have the luxury of time. They care about things like stealth. But if you are compromised by one of these nation-state threat actors, it often is playing the long game and understanding everywhere where they have a foothold in the environment. Because if you try and do sort of a half-assed job basically at like rectifying the situation, you tend to find that they come straight back in. And so in those sorts of situations, it was more kind of like a IT rebuild transformation project to build a defendable architecture that could defend the attackers if we kicked them out, right? And we're talking, multi-year long projects in that respect that cost a lot of money, but it's the right and the most correct way to make sure that the networks are resilient enough to resist attack again.
Yeah. Okay. You had more examples?
Yeah. So another example, I think, which I think probably is the one that concerns me the most, is more the small, medium business enterprises. So particularly the IT services type providers. And that's probably the area where Defendable as a company has seen the most types of attacks in the last sort of 2 years.
Because
probably
you are exposed.
Yeah, they're more exposed, but it tends to be the ransomware that hits them. And with those attacks, it's much more stressful because you don't have the luxury of time. Things are down, and so you have an operational imperative to get things up again. But at the same time, you need to figure out how this happened so that it doesn't happen again. And I think one of the main concerns I have with those types of attacks is you see these companies where the amount of revenues they have is not that much. And then when they get hit with some of these attacks, it's pretty much their entire year's, profits essentially that go down the window.
But now we are talking about companies that is delivering some
IT services
like
to other
software as a
companies.
service, for example.
Yeah, software as a service, but even infrastructure as well. You know, so like hosting their websites or whatnot.
And then someone is attacking and encrypting their server.
Exactly. The servers, or it could be like end user computing platform. So basically preventing them from doing any work. But I think what's most concerning is that their customers, right? They're also heavily affected.
Yeah, because they are losing their
data. They're not able to access anything. We had one case where there was an accounting firm that was a customer of an IT company, and they lost all their books for an entire year. And so they effectively have to redo the books, in the space of 2 months, hire other consultants to redo this work.
Very expensive.
Very expensive. And then the company is effectively liable as well for this other company's losses.
You don't even have all the invoices and all that. You have to do investigation to get it back.
Yeah, recovery, and sometimes
nightmare.
it's not recoverable if there are no backups. That if the company hasn't done a good job with the backups, or if the backups have been encrypted, it is a true nightmare, because then you have lost all that data.
And the tax authorities, they don't care.
I guess they do probably care in some way, but they're not able to do anything about it. Yeah, really. Maybe they have some, data that you can get from the historical data, but
in this case, what did you do?
In this case, we helped that IT provider basically recover, and so unfortunately, that accounting firm, they just had to redo the books because they had no backup data to recover. But for all the other customers, fortunately, they did have backups, so it's a big job restoring all of that. But I think the bigger job as well is quite often with a lot of these most serious attacks, the ones that are costing, upwards of 300 million for some of these larger enterprise customers. It boils down to a loss of control over the identities. So basically, if the Active Directory, the thing that governs who can access what, who can access the environment, all that stuff, and what groups are they a part of, if that is fully hosed, basically if that is compromised, then you have a job on your hands to recover properly and make sure that the threat actors can't get back into the environment. And so that's kind of what my presentation more or less deals with. It's because the attacks that our company deals with, they're not necessarily very advanced. It's very, very simple IT hygiene practices that can prevent a lot of these attacks. But a lot of companies are still worried about, AI, all these other things, when really my presentation is mostly about, I want to get back to fundamental basics of doing IT well. Because if you do these things well, then it's still, even with sort of all the advances with AI, it should be quite difficult for an attacker to go from getting initial access in the environment through some kind of spear phishing to getting to the stage where they're actually able to imitate anyone in the environment because they've basically compromised Active Directory and they're exfiltrating things, almost sensitive data willy-nilly.
Because from like just getting inside the firewall to be a root user, it's quite a long step.
It should be. Yeah. It should be. But the thing that we see time and time again with these incidents is that it's not happening that way because those lack of controls are not there. There is no network segmentation. There is poor patch management. There is a lack of privileged access management. So say, for instance, they have a web server that's directly exposed to the internet. It's unpatched. And also there is no privileged access management, so they're logging on with...
Let's take this patch part, because patch is a way to put in updates.
Yes.
And as soon as a patch is coming, you're also telling about the weaknesses in the server. So then all the hackers will know about the weaknesses because of the...
But at least they won't be able to exploit it, and what we're seeing in a lot of these instances...
I mean, if you haven't patched...
Yeah, if you haven't patched, exactly.
And then the patch has come and you have information about the patch, then you can read about the patch and then check, no, they haven't patched it yet, and then they find the hole in the system, right?
Yes, exactly. That, I think, far and away is the most common vector that we see for these disastrous incidents. It's actually not spear phishing, because in theory, if you have your defensive ducks in a row, it should be very difficult for a threat actor to go from compromising a single user with a spear phishing email to actually achieving malware execution on that machine. And then they have to go figure out, how can I get higher level privileges so I can move around in the environment? If you have network segmentation in place, that should not be very easy. There should be so many steps that administrators and people can put in place before it gets to a point where they're at the end objective of encrypting your backups and whatnot. In theory, there should be so many things you can do before that point.
Segmentation, it's like you have a web page which is exposed on internet, but this web page is using a database, and this database is behind the firewall. Is that
so there's segmentation, but we're just talking about sort of firewalls and actually divvying up your network into different zones, so that you have things that we know these things must be exposed to the internet, right? But you still try and harden them as much as possible. But those things, it shouldn't be that everything is like that. It shouldn't be a pancake, and those things that are exposed to the internet shouldn't be able to talk kind of directly without some kind of firewall in place or some kind of segmentation or proxy to things that are more precious, that have sensitive data that really shouldn't be exposed to the internet, or things like the domain controller, of course, that really shouldn't be directly exposed to the internet. And it's unfortunately, actually, I've seen instances in the past where they have been exposed to the internet.
But you said that it's like 3 steps that the hacker is going through.
No, it's many, many more. But I think it's instead of thinking of it steps, it's almost like they have to cycle back to some of those steps. But we often talk about in the cyber intel and sort of security community, the attack kill chain. And I think maybe it's wrong to think of it as a chain. It kind of, as I mentioned, it loops back in. But generally speaking, if you think about what attackers have to do to achieve action on objectives, it's quite...
You're teaching me how to be an attacker now?
Yeah, but I think, any penetration tester as well, they'll have to go through these steps, right? You need to do some reconnaissance, right, to try and figure out a way I can get initial access to the environment, whether that's through targeted spear phishing. It doesn't even have to be that targeted, or it could be through what I mentioned before, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for things that are directly exposed to the internet that you can exploit and then get remote backdoor installed on a server somewhere.
But, you can do this port scan. That's one
absolutely.
So
Look at
this
what's
is one
open.
of the investigations that a hacker can do.
Many things that a hacker do.
But also, if you talk with the server, kind of, will you find out what version they have, or if they have the right patches?
Yes, exactly. So they can do all sorts of scans to figure out, is this exploitable? What ports are open? I mean, if you have direct RDP open to the internet and somebody can brute force that and you have no other two-factor authentication, then that's an avenue. So that's just the initial part, right? But then after that, right, you still have to get access to credentials. You still have to get persistent malware in the environment. You still have to be able to execute that malware. A lot of the modern sort of XDR and endpoint detection response agents, they're pretty good these days. So you need to find clever mechanisms to evade those, to actually get malware, permanent persistence on a machine or a server or whatnot. And you need to escalate privileges. You need to be able to move laterally to the environment, because probably the initial access point may not have the information you're actually after.
No.
And so there are still a lot of steps that the attackers have to go through to get to the end objective, in theory. And that gives us, as defenders, a lot of opportunities to stop it before it gets to that point. But I think the main message of what I'm trying to say with my presentation here is that those basic things that can stop things at each of these steps, the incidents that we see, it really boils down to a lack of implementation, good implementation of those basic things.
But when you try to find out if someone is trying to do something bad, then you should have some alarms, or you should look for some.
That's a good, very
normal activities.
Very good point.
If you try to log in 250 times, or 250,000 times, or 200 million times. So,
absolutely. What's really interesting is that what we see in a lot of the cases that we get that have ended up at this point of like true crisis, actually, oftentimes these companies do have some kind of AV in place, or some kind of basic endpoint detection response. Maybe they have a Microsoft Defender business premium plan or something, or they do have Trend Micro and whatnot. But the problem is, and these things are actually alerting. They're saying that, I have Mimikatz, password dumping tool in my environment, or I have, Conti ransomware. Is someone tried to deploy that? But there's actually no one looking at these alarms. They do not have the resources to look at it. And so oftentimes when my team comes in and they start investigating...
Especially small companies.
Exactly.
The CEO is also
they're doing a billion different things, and it's a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, and so they just don't have the resources to look at it. And so these things are alarming, but no one's looking at them. And I kind of, address that in my talk.
Can't you set it up to send a mail at least? So that you don't... You could,
but the fact of the matter is it's not happening.
But that was the implementation that you talked about, that was badly
lack
done.
Of implementation, but also resourcing. And I guess that's where our company comes in as well, in that a lot of the companies out there do not have time to spend 24/7 looking at these alerts. And so that's where a company like the company I work for comes into play. If you do not have the time to look at it, then we gladly look at it for you. So just because you can see things as well, if there's no one actually there to receive that, it's still useless, right, at the end of the day.
I think I understand. I see we are going for the end of this podcast for today, but I learned a lot.
Good to hear that.
So I say thank you very much, Angela Wong, CTO in Defendable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Takk for at du hørte på Digitaliseringspodden, levert av Computerworld og Already On.